Great. So one of the really sort of active forums that we had online was asking questions about the plague, which I can't presume what the interest was, but I imagine that in my mind it's related to the large scale global epidemic we're now seeing, or the fears of a global epidemic coming out of West Africa with Ebola. And the plague is probably the biggest global pandemic that most people have heard of and have been familiar with in the past. And so some of the questions that have come out of that forum are, where did the plague come from? How did it end? What caused the end of that epidemic? And what can we learn about the end of that epidemic that might inform how future pandemics might be controlled or might end on their own?
So we don't know exactly where the plague came from. We know where it first entered Europe. And if you don't know about the plague, it's this terrible disease which spread across Europe in the 1300s and 1400s and right up until the 1650s. And by estimations, 1/3 of all Europe died because of this disease. In some places it was as much as 60 or 70%. They have some really great parish records from England to show that so many people died. We know it entered Europe in Genoa and then very rapidly spread, and the suspicion is it came from the Far East, and it's a disease which is also spread by fleas of rats, so there's a complicated disease transmission. And it's not necessarily the case that it just went away. We can still have plague in some locations, and some studies here in the US look at plague in prairie dog systems that Peter knows a lot about. So in that case, it didn't disappear, it's still part of it, but the actual pandemic did pass over. But it took quite a long time, a couple of 100 years of successive large events before that went away. Why did it go away? Well, people had a greater insight into control. So we know from a lot of really good historical records in Florence and throughout Italy about how the municipalities got together and mandated quarantine events. Quarantine is a word that comes from the Italian 40 giorni, which is 40 days. So individuals were able to put into place aspects of control of diseases. So we overcame that, but it took a lot of thinking on the fly.
Yeah. And actually, I think an important point of the case study of plague is that this was at a time before there was a pharmaceutical solution to that, right? A lot of the concern with Ebola and SARS and other emergent diseases now is how can we rapidly develop the appropriate drugs and the appropriate treatments for that. But I think the example of plague suggests that non-pharmaceutical controls and cultural and behavioral controls can be really very important in stemming this transmission.
So when I used to walk to school in Britain every day, I had to walk past the plague houses.
Uphill both ways.
And there are these plague houses all throughout the British countryside where these people were actually sent. But the impact on countries like Italy was phenomenal. It took Italy, 600 years to recover.
Yeah.
They were basically, most people were dead.
Yes.
It was a huge impact on the population.
It seems to me that one of the interesting things about the plague case and some of what's coming out of West Africa at the moment is the fundamental knowledge of the biology, how the transmission is working, how the whole process is going. That makes a huge difference to what you do. And in plague times, it was all a mystery. There's all this strange thinking about what was going on. Nobody understood it. Till you have the germ theory of infectious disease, it's very, very hard to control these things. People used to think malaria came off some smell of the swamps, and cholera was a nasty vegetative process. It's weird things. And when you understand things, you control it better. And you see in West Africa now that where the understanding does not exist, then there's awful problems controlling it.
But there's a lot of similarity between plague and the Ebola outbreak at the moment, because both of them are highly spatial. So they would come into a town, there would be a burning, there would be an outbreak of the disease, and then it would flip like a spark from a fire to another town, and it would set it off again. And that's exactly what's happening with Ebola, because people are rushing back to their villages and places to get their health support from their family, and that's setting off localized little outbreaks.
It's very interesting, though, in the absence of the information that we have, both how to intervene, but also just the general germ theory and what's causing it.
Yeah.
Quarantine is what works the best.
So I would add a point to that. So even in the Roman Empire, we knew the malaria, which is again an Italian word for bad air. We knew what was causing us swamps, and Vitruvius, the Roman architect, built swamps in various places, built barracks in various places to avoid the presence of malaria. Al-Rashi, an architect in Baghdad, used to nail up rotting meat on planks of wood to decide where he would best situate a hospital in Baghdad. 8th century Baghdad. So we did have inklings of it, even though, of course, germ theory did come around and then gave us a
I still think
structure.
the most fundamental medical advance, public health advance in malaria was figuring out that it was mosquito-borne.
Mm.
Yeah,
More than the drugs, more than anything else, the mosquito-borne has been just immensely important.